Hey guys, welcome to another review. So it's been a while since I've watched any movies. I just got back from watching Aquaman on IMAX, so I figured I'd talk a little bit about it while the memory is still fresh in my mind. I think this is the second movie I've talked about. The first one was Wreck-It Ralph 2, which was quite a few weeks ago. So I'm a little bit late to the party for Aquaman. Obviously, it's been out for a couple weeks, but I'm a little bit fortunate because I think this is sort of the dead time for blockbusters. It's now summer, and usually, during the summer blockbuster months, a big effects movie will be on IMAX for basically 1 week, at most two, usually just one. And then the next week, of course, you have another major effects blockbuster coming in, and so it knocks the previous movie off of IMAX. And so if you're like me and you really like to enjoy your movies on the biggest screen on IMAX or IMAX 3D, then you have a very narrow window of opportunity to kind of watch the movie before you lose the opportunity to watch IMAX. But luckily for Christmas time, Aquaman didn't have a lot of other real competition for this level of effect. And the two major movies going against it was Bumblebee and Mary Poppins Returns, neither of which were sort of big enough names to justify IMAX releases. And so I was able to kind of at my leisure go and watch it. So just interesting to share my thoughts. I don't, like I said, have any pretensions of having thousands of followers or whatever, and these movie reviews are just for fun to share my thoughts, and then maybe years down the road myself and my family can look back on it and then we'll remember, oh, that's what you thought about, for instance, Wreck-It Ralph 2 or Aquaman. So let's talk about Aquaman again. All my reviews are spoilers since I'm not doing this commercially, and I don't do it when it first comes out. I don't see any need to have a spoiler or non-spoiler review. They're all going to be spoiler reviews. So overall, my feeling for Aquaman is that it's at the same time a very, very good movie and then also a kind of a horrible movie all at the same time, which is really weird. And I don't see many movies that give me that particular feeling. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's just talk about the good. There are certain parts of the movie I really loved a lot. I really loved the world building and the special effects. Normally, I'm not a big CGI fan. Like, I'm not the sort of moviegoer who just loves more effects, and the more CGI, the better. I tend to like special effects in all their forms, whether practical or CGI, that serves the story. And so that's just my viewpoint and how I come at movies. So again, I'm not a big CGI fan, but I have to say that the thing that really makes this movie stand out, I think, depending on what source you read, I think the movie cost $200 million to make, not including the marketing and all of that. And you definitely can see that money. Sometimes you have movies that supposedly cost $150 million and you're befuddled. You have no idea where did that money go. And I think that's probably a problem with the producer. Sometimes it just looks cheap and there's a lot of money wasted. But here, you really appreciate the $200 million, if that's true. They just did a remarkable job sort of bringing this alien world to life. And I think there's been some comparisons to, for instance, Pandora, the world of Avatar, that James Cameron did many, many years ago. And while I wouldn't say it's on that level, I can definitely see where that comparison would come from. You sort of have this remarkable vista that really no one knows about. It gives you the same freedom, I think, of creativity that an alien planet would, and I think James Wan, to his credit, really brought that to life. Very much, I think, detail-oriented. If you read the comic books for Aquaman, I think he did a very, very good job bringing large aspects of that to life. And it's just like a sort of a mind-blowing initial impression when you go to see Atlantis. It definitely makes it just sort of shocks and awes you. You're in shock and you're in awe. So I loved that. I loved the attention, again, to detail, and there's so many different little elements where he integrated the fish and the sharks, the marine life, He sort of gave you this grand glimpse of this amazing culture, and you really, I think, do feel the majesty, of Atlantis and their advanced civilization, and you do kind of buy into the fact that here's this race of amazing, you know, basically not humans, but just these amazing species, I guess you could say, who could rise up and, for instance, conquer the world if they so wished. So I think number one, the effects amazing, and then again the detail and the world building amazing. You really feel like this is a living, breathing place. So that was really very, very good. I thought that the action set pieces were expertly done, as you would expect from the guy who gave us the Fast and the Furious. I think he did the one right after the actor Paul Anderson or Paul Walker. I think Paul Walker. I think he did the one right after Paul Walker tragically passed away in a car accident. That might have been 7, I believe. And so James Wan obviously has a lot of experience doing huge action pieces, and that experience does show. There was a lot of action set pieces in the movie, and I enjoyed essentially all of them. So the action pieces were very, very well done. So we got world building, you got special effects, CGI, action pieces. You see this on IMAX, and I just feel like there's no way you can complain about not getting your money's worth. I mean, you will feel like you got your $20 worth of entertainment. No controversy there at all. Now, that being said, so that was where I had a really, really good time. And there were some parts in the movie where I had chills of excitement, and that was really, really good. The problem I run into with the movie being bad is when you run into sort of the pacing of the film, as well as the dialogue, the story, and then the acting. So basically, I think the veneer of the movie is an A+. It's fantastic. The settings, the world, all of that. But, getting to sort of the meat of a movie and what makes a movie compelling and whether it really brings forth any true emotion out of you, that is where we run into some problems. So let's just go through it a little bit. Number one, the pacing and the length of the movie is a bit problematic. It clocks in at 2 hours and 20 plus minutes, almost 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours, I mean, that is a staggering length for Aquaman, if you stop and think about it. I mean, Avengers Infinity War was a culmination of 10 years of build-up with 30 characters and superheroes, and that was about the same time period. Schindler's List was 3 hours. Saving Private Ryan, I think, in the neighborhood of 2.5 hours. Dances with Wolves. I mean, does a movie named Aquaman, with what it's trying to do, does that merit 2 hours and 25 plus minutes? I think that's a little bit debatable. And then on top of that, you feel a lot of that 2.5 hours. I mean, it's not like, it just flew by. In comparison, for instance, like for Infinity War, even though it was about the same time, my heart was in my mouth, like literally the whole time period. I didn't feel the length at all. I mean, it was the shortest 2.5 hours I ever felt in a movie theater. And the same can't really be said of this movie. And the problem with that is it's very, very long, and then the pacing kind of goes in and out sometimes. There's lots of really, really great action pieces, and then it kind of slows down in some parts and just basically almost comes to a standstill. And other reviewers kind of have mentioned the fact that they feel like the action sequences were too many, too over the top, too long, so that it almost became a little bit stultifying, like almost became too much stimulation. And while I can see that, for me personally, even though I did feel, yes, a little bit too much action sequences, I can definitely see where that criticism comes from. For me personally, I really enjoyed those, because whenever you don't have them, then that's when you start having problems with actors having to act, dialogue having to be spoken. You have to start thinking about the story and where these people are going, and then the movie sort of falls apart when it's not going at breakneck speed. So what do we mean by the dialogue? Well, we're going to talk about the dialogue and the acting sort of come hand in hand, right? So there's some really clunky dialogue, a lot of very heavy-handed exposition, flashbacks, just basically dialogue that didn't feel to me at least very believable, very natural. And then, of course, you always look at sort of the interplay between direction, script, and acting, right? And if all three come together, you make movie magic. But if one is lacking, then sometimes greatness in another arena can save it. So in my opinion, I think that the dialogue and the script was a little bit lacking, but then great direction and great acting may save that. The problem, in my opinion, is that James Wan's directing of the dialogue and the character moments is not his strong point. And so I felt that his direction was average to mediocre at best. And then you have to leave it to the actors to sort of bear the brunt of the responsibility of doing something with that dialogue in those moments. And unfortunately, the two main characters are played by Jason Momoa, Aquaman, and Amber Heard, who plays the role of Princess Mira. And when you look at the trailers and all of that, the trailers don't lie. I mean, these two really are the main characters. They carry the movie. And while they're certainly very beautiful people, very charming people, very charismatic people, I don't think that their acting chops were quite enough to then get you over the hump with the poor dialogue. Again, if you had really, really good dialogue, a great script, average directing, then I think that Momoa and Heard could have done okay. It's obvious they're trying. They certainly, I didn't feel like they were laughing it off. I didn't feel like they were dialing it in. They were obviously trying very, very hard, and they were taking the material very seriously. But sometimes it's just talent, right? I mean, not everybody can be Leonardo DiCaprio. Not everybody can be Meryl Streep, right? And it is what it is. So you had sort of clunky dialogue, clunky exposition, and then the acting is a little bit wooden. There's not a lot of emotional range. And I think James Wan understood this. To his credit, from the way that Aquaman has been sort of reintroduced to the DC universe, he is what he is. He's sort of like big, muscular. Momoa reminds me a lot with his portrayal of Aquaman, because remember in Justice League, he's a part of an ensemble, so he has a very, very small role, tiny little character moments that make you sort of laugh. But this is a movie where he's in it like a lot. Again, he, along with Amber Heard, has to carry the movie. And so you get a lot more of him, and that's where you kind of get at least for me, I felt like I got a lot of the Conan the Barbarian vibe from him, when he remade Conan the Barbarian. And I remember when I saw Jason Momoa in Conan the Barbarian, even though I think Momoa did an average job, it did make me ironically appreciate even more the charisma of Arnold Schwarzenegger. Because in Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he made Conan the Barbarian, again, his English was, not great, had a lot of heavy accent, and yet the charisma and sort of the acting of Arnold even back then, I felt was so much superior to what Momoa did with the remake. And it just made me appreciate again how much, or how great Arnold was back, when he made Conan the Barbarian. And when you see Aquaman, you don't get very, very different vibes from Momoa's characterization. It reminds me a lot of Conan the Barbarian as kind of Aquaman, very muscular. He uses a lot of modern day slang, like say getting his ass kicked, stuff like that, which it works well coming out of Jason Momoa's mouth. But then I don't know Aquaman at all. I'm not a big Aquaman fan. I don't read comic books, for instance. So I'm not expert in this, but from what little I know, I don't know if Aquaman talks like that. I don't think Aquaman is quite like that. And so they sort of reinvented his character, which is fine. But it really makes me feel like kind of Jason Momoa is playing Jason Momoa. Not so much as him trying to bring Aquaman, for instance, to life from the comics. So much for that, the acting not very good. And then the story is kind of very cookie cutter, very, very basic, very, very predictable. And then the greatest sin is on top of being predictable and on top of being very basic, it's overstuffed. And again, I don't know why DC movies want to do this. In the core of it, there I think is a very, very good movie, but then they sort of muck it up with a lot of different elements, too many different elements, and it becomes very tiresome and you get very, very tired. So from my perspective, I loved the beginning part of it. Again, it gives you that sense of wonder. They change things up a lot. Aquaman gets to fight his half-brother, Prince Orn, very early in the movie. So that's something like normally that you would expect to happen at the climax, but they moved it very early on. There was a lot of inventiveness. Again, the world building was right there in your face. I really loved, I think, the first maybe 40 minutes where you're getting into it. And then, they got to this one part where all of a sudden this movie turned into, for lack of a better term, romancing. It's the one with Kirk Douglas and Kathleen Turner. It's sort of like a send-up of Indiana Jones. I mean, not as good as Indiana Jones, but it was a send-up of it. I think you guys will know what I mean. I think it's Romancing the Stone or something. I think it's Romancing the Stone. And it turned into like a send-up of Romancing the Stone. It turned into almost like a sitcom, whereas like the whole, do they like each other? Do they not like each other? You've seen this 100 times. And, them going, it also reminds me like when they went to the Sahara. It reminds me again of like The Mummy with Brendan Fraser, and what's her name, Rachel Weisz, is it? So the movie changed the tone like drastically. In the beginning, it's this kind of very grand, operatic, world immersion in a whole different world, very, very high concepts, and then they plop you in the middle on essentially like a very by the numbers fetch quest adventure. And the movie can't support that. I mean, you have an entire movie like Indiana Jones, whose whole point, or Romancing the Stone, whose whole point is that little middle section, and they just kind of give you that. And the chemistry between Amber Heard and Jason Momoa is very shaky. They're not good enough actors to rise above that. So the chemistry was so-so. It's very difficult for you to buy into the fact that they're attracted to each other or that they're going to fall in love. I think she introduces herself by making a reference to the events of Justice League, where she said that you defeated Steppenwolf, which is a little bit confusing because obviously when she says that, it immediately puts the time frame to following Justice League. And then you're thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute, they were down there, Mira already knows Aquaman. Were they in Atlantis in Justice League then? I mean, this cube that seems incredibly important, and everybody seems to have trusted Aquaman and taken his lead back in the movie Justice League. So, you kind of get this feeling, at least from Justice League, that he was already accepted and had a role of respect in Atlantis. But here in Aquaman the movie, even though she clearly makes reference to those events, meaning this is a sequel to that, and but then he's right back to square one, and is completely unknown to the majority of Atlanteans, I think. So it's kind of confusing, I think, on that point. But that really, I think, for me, was excruciating. It really slowed down the story a lot, and it really sort of highlighted the weaknesses of what I mentioned previously, which is again the pacing, the acting, and the dialogue. And then it sort of quickly shepherds you to the climax of the movie, which is this big CGI battle fest. It was very reminiscent of Attack of the Clones. We had just like tons of CGI creatures destroying each other. And it felt very rushed. It felt like, they had to end the movie. I remember checking my watch and saying, oh my God, it's already 9, I watched it in the evening time. It's like, I was already 2 hours and 10 minutes into the movie. They have to finish it soon and there's no more time. And it kind of felt like the movie felt that way too. And you just rushed to the climax and to the ending and then to the final fight between Prince Orn and Aquaman. So I thought that the climax and the ending just, again, the pacing was a bit off. It occurred way too quickly. So my opinion, the first, I think, third of the movie was fabulous, incredible groundwork. And then it really sort of just fell off in the middle and the end. In terms of the other highlights of the acting, I thought that Nicole Kidman was fine. She's a good actress. She can do this in her sleep. I didn't think she was dialing it in. William Dafoe also, I think, was very, very good. I liked them. The characters were a little bit not much to do in a sense, very, very cookie cutter, but I thought that the acting sort of elevated the material. And compared to like veterans, like, Nicole Kidman is an Oscar-winning actress. William Dafoe is a multiple Oscar-nominated actor. So when you compare Amber Heard and Momoa's acting against those two, it's a pretty clear, gulf. It's a pretty clear difference. You can clearly see where the acting can elevate the material, and then where the acting is unable to do that. So I liked the acting overall. It was pretty good. So that's what I mean when I say the movie is like fantastic and also not very good all at the same time. And it's easy to sort of get caught up in all the effects and things like that, but you have to remember, what would this movie be like if they didn't have the CGI, if they didn't have the money? What if this movie was made in the 80s, or 90s, where this type of technology just wasn't there, or the budget just wasn't there? Back in those days, those movies really had to rise above the effects. They had to kind of introduce such powerful characters and write such wonderful dialogue that you sort of make up in your head for the lack of the effects. And I just think to myself, if it wasn't for the effects, this would be a pretty bad, pretty mediocre film. But luckily, it does have the effects, and I think that, and I don't say this often, I think the world building is strong enough to sort of offset those disadvantages. I won't go too much more into story. There's a lot of plot holes, and people get into plot holes, but I think that's not really very fruitful, I think, criticism going down this path, because again, this is a movie about, a superhero, and you have to sort of have some sort of suspension of disbelief. You have to sort of have some sort of acceptance. And unless the plot is completely, out there, then I'm just gonna let the movie, I'll give the movie a break. I will accept what the movie is trying to do. I think one of the criticisms was how powerful they made the Atlanteans. They made the society too powerful, too amazing. And then the obvious question is, why didn't this society conquer the earth much earlier? Why did this society even have to try to gather all of the kingdoms, which is one of the plot points, where they needed all 7 kingdoms to gather together to fight, I think some reviewers said, well, why couldn't Prince Orange just do it himself and just raise tidal waves and all of that? That's one of the criticisms of the plot, but my response is, if you do that, you can go endlessly on. I mean, there's a lot of different responses to that within the context of the world, right? I could just say, well, he can't. Don't forget that there's people like Wonder Woman and Superman and Batman hanging around. As powerful as Atlantis is, you're only watching a movie within a little tiny bubble of Aquaman's character and Aquaman's bad guys. You bring Superman, it destroys all of the balance. It destroys everything. Superman can just freeze the oceans. He can destroy all of the Atlantis. He's the guy who could probably wipe out Atlantis by himself if you don't have kryptonite. Wonder Woman is actually against, in the mythology of the DC universe, she's a god. So, and of course, if you're a fan of Batman, Batman can beat everybody because he's just the smartest guy, in the world. He can figure out everybody's weaknesses, right? And the joke is that how does Batman get away with everything? Because he's Batman. So you can't have just Atlantis go up and conquer the world. Superman would just stop that. Wonder Woman would just stop that. Batman would just stop that. There's other things going on. So I think, again, criticizing the story for those type of little things, those little nitpicks, doesn't really make much sense, because, again, you can just delve into the same universe of a fantasy and come up with a response very easily, correct? So, again, overall, these are my thoughts on Aquaman. I think it's a very, very good popcorn movie. I still think that Wonder Woman is a significantly superior movie to this one. Even though Wonder Woman's third act was, again, a little bit cookie cutter, a little bit cliche, over CGI. But overall, I think it was a stronger film than Aquaman. But I think that the world building of Aquaman is the best of any DC movie. So it has that going for it. But overall, I mean, definitely, I think it's headed in the right direction. There still has a ways to go. The best Marvel movies, at least for me, really makes me feel for the characters. And this movie didn't make me feel for the characters very much. I enjoyed it on a very superficial level. Again, like I said, it gave me enough action sequences, enough world building, and enough detail to make me feel like I definitely got my $20 worth, when I watched this on IMAX. But anything deeper, it didn't do anything for me there. So I guess the analogy would be, why do you drink alcohol? Do you drink alcohol just to get buzzed? Do you drink alcohol because you're drunk, you just like black out? Is it like an addiction? And so are you drinking because you just want to get the effect of the drug? Or are you drinking because you really enjoy the taste of it? Are you a sommelier, a wine aficionado? Do you like the taste of the wine, all of that? So this is, I guess, the sort of movie where, you're enjoying it basically just to get drunk. There's not much other subtlety or flavor other than that. So anyways, that's my review of Aquaman. Hope that added some perspective to things from what I thought about. And until next time, take care.